in the 1930s and 1940s, the Jewish underground in Palestine was described as quote-unquote terrorist. Then new things happened. By 1942, Holocaust was occurring and a certain liberal sympathy with the Jewish people had built up in the Western world. At that point, the terrorists of Palestine, who were Zionists, the terrorists of Palestine suddenly started to be described by 1944-45 as freedom fighters. At least two Israeli prime ministers, including Menachem Begin, had actually, you can find in the books, posters with their pictures saying terrorist and prize this much. The highest prize I have noted so far was 100,000 British pounds on the head of Menachem Begin, the terrorist. Then in 1969 and from 1969 to 1990, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, occupied the center stage as the terrorist organization. Yasser Arafat has been described repeatedly by the great sage of American journalism, I'm referring to William Safire of the New York Times, as the chief of terrorism. That's Yasser Arafat. Now, on September 29, 1998, I was rather amused to notice a picture of Yasser Arafat to the right of President Bill Clinton, and to his left is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Clinton is looking towards Arafat, and Arafat is looking literally like a meek mouse. And just a few years earlier, he used to appear with this very menacing look around him, with a gun appearing menacing from his belt. You remember those pictures, and you remember the next one. I should go on. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan received a group of bearded men. These bearded men I was writing about in those days in the New Yorker. They were very ferocious-looking bearded men with turbans and tall and kind of looking like they came from another century. And President Reagan received them in the White House. After receiving them, he spoke to the press. And he pointed towards them, I'm sure some of you will recall that moment, and said, these are the moral equivalent of America's founding fathers. These were the Afghan Mujahideen. They were at that time, guns in hand, battling the evil empire. And they were the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. In 1998, September, another American president ordered missile strikes from the American Navy based in the Indian Ocean, ordered missile strikes to kill Osama bin Laden and his men in the camps in Afghanistan. I do not wish to embarrass you with a reminder that Mr. bin Laden, whom the 15 American missiles were fired to hit in Afghanistan, was only a few years ago the moral equivalent of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. He got angry over the fact that he has been demoted from moral equivalent of your founding fathers. So he is taking out his anger in different ways. I'll come back to that subject more seriously in a minute. You see, why I have recalled all this story is to merely point out to you that the matter of terrorism is rather complicated, and terrorists change. So the terrorist of yesterday is the hero of today, and the hero of yesterday becomes the terrorist of today. This is a serious matter of constantly changing world of images in which we have to keep our heads straight to know what is terrorism and what is not. But more importantly, to know what causes it and how to stop it. Next point about our terrorism is that posture of inconsistency necessarily evades definition. If you are not going to be consistent, you are not going to define. I have examined at least 20 official documents on terrorism. Not one defines the word. Not one defines the word. All of them explain it, express it emotively, polemically, to arouse our emotions rather than exercise our intelligence. I'll give you only one example which is representative. October 25th, 1984. George Shultz, then Secretary of State of the United States of America, speaking at the New York Park Avenue Synagogue, a long speech on terrorism. Seven in the State Department bulletin, 7 single-spaced pages, not a single definition of terrorism. What we get is the following quotations. Terrorism is a modern barbarism that we call terrorism. Definition number 1. Definition number 2 is even more brilliant. Terrorism is a form of political violence. Aren't you surprised? It is a form of political violence, says George Shultz, Secretary of State of the United States of America. Number 3, terrorism is a threat to Western civilization. Number 4, terrorism is a menace to Western moral values. Did you notice? Does it tell you anything other than arouse your emotion? Typically, this is typical. They don't define terrorism because definitions involve a commitment to analysis, comprehension, and adherence to some norms of consistency. That's the second characteristic of the official literature on terrorism. The third characteristic is that the absence of definition does not prevent officials to be globalistic. We may not define terrorism, but it is a menace to the moral values of Western civilization. It is a menace also to mankind. It's a menace to good order. Therefore, we must stamp it out worldwide. Our reach has to be global. You need a global reach to kill it.